No one in the diner noticed the man. Until he stood up. He took one step forward, placing himself between a gun and a trembling girl behind him. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply chose to stand where the danger was greatest. And that moment was only the beginning of his story. If this story touches your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Angels in Uniform, and turn on the notification bell. Because some heroes don't wear their uniforms anymore, but their courage still protects us every day. No one in the diner noticed the man at first. He sat near the back, shoulders slightly hunched, one hand resting on a worn wooden cane, the other loosely wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. His jacket was faded, the kind of dark navy coat that had seen too many winters, frayed at the cuffs as if it had been held onto longer than it should have been. His beard was uneven, streaked with early gray, framing a face carved by angles and restraint rather than softness. He did not look dangerous. He did not look important. He looked like someone who had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Across the table sat a teenage girl, thin and tense, her hoodie pulled up despite the warmth inside the diner. Her hair, light brown, straight, hastily tied back, kept falling into her face as she stared down at her phone, fingers tapping without purpose. Her jaw tightened every time she sensed eyes drifting their way. She did not look at the man often. When she did, it was brief, guarded, as if closeness itself embarrassed her. Between their chairs lay a large German shepherd, his body stretched along the tiled floor with military stillness. His coat was dark sable, thick and glossy despite the faint scars along one ear and the tight line near his back leg. He was older, 9, maybe 10, but his eyes were sharp, amber, and alert, tracking every movement in the room. His breathing was slow, controlled, almost deliberate, as if calm itself were a command he obeyed. The diner smelled of coffee and fried onions. A waitress named Sarah, mid-40s, tall and lean, her blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail, moved between tables with tired grace. Her smile was practiced but kind, the kind worn by someone who had learned to soften strangers' days for a living. She glanced at the man and the girl more than once, sensing something unspoken between them, but said nothing. Experience had taught her not to ask. Then the door burst open. The sound cut through the low hum of conversation like a blade. A man stormed in, his jacket too thin for the season, his movements erratic, eyes darting with a wildness that made every instinct in the room recoil. He raised a gun, black, heavy, unmistakably real, and shouted for everyone to get down. The floor erupted in chaos. Chairs scraped, plates shattered. A child screamed somewhere near the counter. The girl froze. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered against the tile. Her breath caught sharply in her throat, and she reached out without thinking, fingers clutching the sleeve of the man beside her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking, the word escaping before she could stop it. The man did not flinch. Not at the gun, not at the shouting, not even at the words she used. He stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if he were rising against more than gravity. For a brief moment, pain flickered across his face, quick, contained, then vanished. He stepped forward once, placing his body squarely between the gun and the trembling girl behind him. He did not raise his hands. He did not shout back. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, almost quiet. "She stays behind me." It was not a plea. It was not a threat. It was a statement, as solid as the ground beneath his feet. The gunman hesitated, confusion flashing across his features. "Sit down," he barked, finger tightening on the trigger. Sit down before you get yourself killed. The man shook his head once. If someone's going to get hurt, he said evenly, it won't be her. Behind him, the German shepherd shifted. At first, it was subtle. A tightening of muscles, a change in breath. Then the dog lowered himself closer to the ground, ears forward, eyes locked onto the gunman with a focus that was almost unsettling. The man did not look back. He didn't need to. He spoke one word, barely louder than a breath. Now. The dog exploded into motion. In one fluid movement, trained and precise, the shepherd launched forward, knocking the gunman off balance. The gun clattered across the floor, skidding beneath a table. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence that followed. Someone screamed again. Someone prayed. The man moved too. Not fast, not flashy, but exactly where he needed to be. He blocked, he anchored, he held. Within seconds, the threat was gone. The gunman lay pinned, the dog's weight pressing him down, growling low, controlled, waiting. Only then did the man's shoulders sag. For just a moment, his hand trembled as he reached for the cane again. He leaned into it, breathing harder now, the cost of his choice catching up with him. The girl behind him broke down, sobs tearing free as she clutched his jacket, burying her face against his back like a child half her age. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaking down her cheeks. She stared at the man, not with fear, but with something deeper, heavier, reverence. But this was not the story of a robbery. This was only the moment when a long-buried truth cracked open. Later that night, long after statements were taken and the diner returned to its uneasy normal, the man stood in the hallway outside the girl's bedroom. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on your chest. Light spilled from beneath her door, and he could hear her laughter, soft, forced, as she spoke on the phone, telling someone she was fine. He raised his hand. His fingers hovered inches from the door, shaking now, not from pain, but from something far worse. Regret, fear, the knowledge that some truths, once spoken, could never be taken back. Behind him, the German shepherd sat watch, his body angled protectively toward both the door and the man. His tail thumped once, softly, as if in encouragement or warning. The man lowered his hand. He turned away without a sound. The next morning, in public, the distance returned. The girl walked ahead of him, never quite beside him, never quite looking back. When people stared, she stiffened, shoulders tightening beneath her hoodie. "Can you walk behind me?" she asked quietly, not meeting his eyes. He nodded. Of course, he always did. What she did not know, what no one in that diner knew, was that the man standing between the gun and the girl had once stood in a place where no one was supposed to survive. That the word he spoke to the dog had been used only once before. In a moment when staying behind meant others could live. That every step he took now was borrowed time, paid for with scars that never fully healed. And this was not the story of a robbery. This was the story of why he was never meant to be here at all. If you believe that God still places angels among us, sometimes in silence and sacrifice, please like this story. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on the notification bell and let us continue honoring the miracles that walk among us. Unseen, but guided by faith. The house felt too quiet after everything that had happened, as if sound itself was afraid to return. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, pale and hesitant, settling over furniture that had not moved in years. The man stood at the kitchen counter, his jacket draped over the back of a chair, his cane leaning nearby like an extra limb he had never asked for. His movements were careful, economical, shaped by pain he did not announce. He poured coffee he would barely drink, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a door closing down the hall. She was awake before him, he could tell. She always was now. When she entered the kitchen, she did not look at him. She moved with the restless energy of someone who wanted to be anywhere else, pulling on her hoodie, slipping her phone into her pocket. Her face was pale, eyes ringed with shadows that no amount of sleep could fix. There was something brittle about her posture, as though she were holding herself together by will alone. "Morning," he said quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm good." The words came quickly, rehearsed, too smooth to be true. She reached for a granola bar and headed for the door. The dog followed her halfway, then stopped. He turned back, positioning himself squarely between them, his body blocking the narrow space of the kitchen. His ears flicked once, alert. He looked from the man to the girl, then sat, heavy and unmoving, as if he had been placed there on purpose. She sighed, irritated. "Come on," she muttered, snapping her fingers. The dog didn't move. The man watched the exchange with a tightness in his chest he could not name. "It's okay," he said softly. "Go." The dog rose only after the man gave a small nod, padding after the girl, nails clicking against the floor. The door shut behind them, leaving the man alone again with his coffee and the quiet. Life, he knew, was supposed to return to normal after moments like the one at the diner. That was what people said. But nothing about this felt normal. Not the way strangers now stared a little longer when they recognized him. Not the way silence filled every space where words should have lived. Outside, the girl walked several steps ahead of him. The sidewalk was narrow, forcing him to lag behind, his cane tapping rhythmically against the concrete. She did not slow down. She did not look back. When they reached the corner, she finally spoke. "Can you walk behind me?" Her voice was low, almost apologetic, but she still did not meet his eyes. He nodded, as he always did. The dog adjusted his pace instinctively, settling into the space between them again, glancing back at the man every few seconds as if checking that he was still there. People passed them, neighbors, commuters, strangers, and the girl's shoulders tightened with each glance. The man noticed everything, the way her hands clenched inside her sleeves, the way she angled her body away from him whenever someone looked too long. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to be ashamed, that she had nothing to apologize for, that if they stared, it was because they did not understand. But the words stayed lodged in his throat, heavy and useless. At the bus stop, a woman stood nearby, perhaps in her early 30s, dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders, eyes kind but curious. She smiled politely at the girl, then at the man. The girl looked away immediately, pretending to check her phone. The bus arrived with a hiss of air and metal. She stepped on without looking back. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. The man stood there longer than necessary, watching until it disappeared around the bend. Only then did he turn back toward home, the dog falling into step beside him. Later that afternoon, Sarah from the diner knocked on the door. She stood on the porch, sunlight catching in her blonde hair, her posture uncertain but determined. Up close, the lines around her eyes told a story of long shifts and quiet resilience. She held a small paper bag in her hands, fingers twisting the top nervously. "I hope this isn't strange," she said, offering a tentative smile. "You left this behind." She held out the cane. "It fell over during everything." He took it, surprised. "Thank you." She hesitated, then glanced down at the dog, who sat calmly at his side, watching her with steady eyes. "He's something else," she said softly. "The way he moved. I've never seen anything like that." The man nodded, but said nothing. Sarah swallowed. "I just wanted to say what you did. That took courage." Her voice wavered slightly. Not everyone would do that. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Anyone would have. She shook her head gently. No, they wouldn't. She paused, then added, "If you ever need anything, coffee's on me." After she left, the man sat on the edge of the bed, the dog resting his head against his knee. His hand moved absently through the thick fur, fingers brushing over the faint scar near the ear. The dog's eyes closed, trusting, familiar. That night, the house felt heavier than before. He stood outside her bedroom door again, listening. This time there was no laughter, only the soft sound of breathing, uneven, broken occasionally by a quiet sniffle. He raised his hand, then froze. Inside his chest, something twisted sharply. And then the dog did something strange. He rose, walked to the door, and sat directly in front of it, his back straight, his head lifted. He did not whine. He did not scratch. He simply sat there, alert, as if standing guard over something sacred. The man's breath caught. He had seen that posture before. Long ago, in a place he tried not to remember, it had meant danger then. Or truth. He stepped back. The next day, while sorting through a box in the hallway closet, the man's hand brushed against something small and brittle. A folded piece of pink paper, a card. "Happy birthday, Daddy. I waited for you." The date was 3 years old. He sank to the floor slowly, card trembling in his hands. He remembered that night, the empty house, the phone he couldn't answer, the promise he had made and failed to keep. She thought he had chosen not to come home. She thought he had left. The truth, that he had been lying unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting to breathe, had never reached her. And he had never corrected it. Perhaps because part of him believed that absence was easier to forgive than the reality of what he had become. Outside, the dog barked once, sharp and sudden, breaking the silence. The man looked up, heart pounding, the weight of everything pressing down on him. This wasn't about embarrassment or distance. It was about a wound that had never been named, and the silence that had grown around it. If this story reminds you that God's work is often done in quiet spaces, through patience, sacrifice, and unseen love, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on notifications, and let us continue to honor the miracles that unfold when faith endures beyond understanding. The hardware store was crowded for a weekday morning, its narrow aisles filled with the smell of wood dust and metal. The man moved slowly through the space, one hand gripping his cane, the other pushing a small cart that rattled softly with every step. His jacket was zipped higher than usual, collar brushing against his beard as if he were trying to make himself smaller. He didn't like places like this. Too many sounds, too many sudden movements. But it was close, and routine had become his safest armor. The dog walked at his side, large shoulders level with the man's knee, tail low and steady. His eyes scanned constantly, nose twitching as it picked up the layered scents of oil, paint, and unfamiliar people. He was calm, but not relaxed. He never was in enclosed spaces. Age had slowed his stride slightly, but not his awareness. Every instinct that had been trained into him still lived just beneath the surface. They were almost done when it happened. A voice, low, rough, unmistakably certain, cut through the noise behind them. "Haven't heard that command in a long time." The man stopped. The dog froze. The cart rolled forward an inch before the man tightened his grip, knuckles whitening. His heart slammed once against his ribs, sharp and sudden, before settling into a heavy, uneven rhythm. Slowly, carefully, he turned. The man standing behind him was tall and broad-shouldered, his posture straight in a way that came not from youth, but from habit. His hair was cropped short, graying at the temples, his face weathered and angular, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow like a permanent reminder of something unfinished. His beard was trimmed close, neat in a way that suggested discipline rather than vanity. He wore a plain jacket, boots scuffed but clean, and his eyes, hard, searching, never left the man's face. The dog growled. It was low, restrained, vibrating through his chest, like a warning that had been buried too long. His hackles lifted, and his body shifted subtly forward, placing himself between the two men without needing to be told. The stranger lifted his hands slightly, palms open. "Easy," he said, voice steady. "I'm not here for trouble." The man swallowed. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath the skin. "You shouldn't use that word," he said quietly. "Not here." The stranger's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Old habits," he replied. "Hard to forget, especially when I hear it again. Now, that was always yours." The man's grip on the cane faltered. For a brief, unguarded moment, something raw flickered across his face. Fear, recognition, anger, all tangled together. Then it was gone, replaced by the blank calm he had perfected over years of silence. "You've got the wrong person," he said, turning the cart away. The stranger stepped into his path. Up close, the years showed more clearly in his face. His skin was roughened by sun and wind, his eyes carrying a weight that suggested he didn't sleep easily. There was a stiffness in his left shoulder, a slight hitch in the way he stood, as though an old injury still argued with him every day. "No," the stranger said softly. "I don't." The dog barked once, sharp, sudden, drawing glances from nearby customers. The man placed a hand on the dog's head, fingers digging into the thick fur, grounding himself in the familiar warmth. "Rex," he murmured, barely audible. The dog stilled instantly, though his eyes never left the stranger. The name hung between them. The stranger's gaze flicked to the dog, then back to the man. "He looks older," he said, "but he always was stubborn. Wouldn't leave your side." The man's breath hitched. His eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted again, colder now. "You need to leave." The stranger exhaled slowly. "I didn't expect you to be here, or anywhere, honestly." His voice lowered. "Some of us thought you wouldn't come back." Something inside the man cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but enough. "Don't," he said, the word tight, restrained. "Don't say that." The stranger studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'm sorry." He paused. When I heard about the diner, I knew. The way you stood. The dog. There aren't many men who move like that anymore." The man's shoulders tensed. "You read the news?" he said flatly. The stranger shook his head. "I was there." He hesitated, then added, "Not close, but close enough." That was when the dog did something strange. He leaned forward and pressed his nose against the stranger's leg, inhaling deeply, then recoiled, a soft whine escaping his throat. His ears flattened, and he backed away, tail low, eyes wide with something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. Or grief. The man felt it then, sharp and sudden, like a hand closing around his heart. He remembered that smell. Metal, smoke, blood. "Enough," he said, louder now, his voice breaking the careful calm he'd held on to for so long. People nearby turned to stare. "You don't get to come into my life and tell you that you shouldn't have been the one to survive." The stranger finished quietly. Silence fell. The man stared at him, breathing hard, every instinct screaming to retreat, to shut this down, to return to the quiet he had built so carefully. "You don't know what you're talking about." The stranger's eyes softened, just a fraction. "I know that 2 men didn't make it out," he said. "And 1 man did. I know that man still walks like he's counting steps, still listens like he's waiting for something to explode." He swallowed. "I know survivors carry things no one else sees." The man looked away. The dog sat at his side now, leaning into his leg, solid and real. The stranger took a step back, recognizing the line he had crossed. "I won't bother you again," he said, "but for what it's worth, you did what you thought was right." The man said nothing. As the stranger turned to leave, he paused. "Sometimes," he added, not looking back, "the ones who come home are the ones who pay the longest." When he was gone, the man stood there for a long time, the noise of the store rushing back in around him. His hands shook openly now. He knelt slowly, pressing his forehead against the dog's head, breathing in the familiar scent that grounded him. That night, at home, the girl watched him from the hallway. He didn't see her at first, lost in his thoughts, the weight of the day pressing down on him. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Confusion, fear, questions neither of them were ready to voice. She opened her mouth, then closed it, turned away. He let her go, because some truths, once spoken, could not be undone, and some decisions saved lives, but never saved the person who made them. If this story reminds you that God sees every sacrifice, even the ones no one else understands, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on notifications and stay with us as we continue to honor faith, courage, and the quiet miracles that walk among us. The hallway light was dim, softened by the yellow glow of a single bulb that had not been replaced in years. The man stood there long after the rest of the house had settled into sleep. His shadow stretched thin along the wall like something unfinished. The door in front of him was closed, painted white, its surface marked by small scratches and fingerprints from a time when the girl inside had still reached for the handle without hesitation. He knew every sound this door made, the faint creak of the hinges, the subtle click when it latched. But tonight, it was silent. And that silence pressed against his chest harder than any pain he carried in his body. He rested one hand against the wall to steady himself, the other gripping his cane. The pain in his leg pulsed dully, a reminder of limits he had learned to accept. Pain was manageable. Pain made sense. What he felt now did not. His heart raced, then slowed, caught between wanting to move forward and fearing what would happen if he did. Behind him, the German shepherd sat with quiet vigilance. Rex was older now, his muzzle dusted with gray, but his posture was unmistakable. Straight-backed, alert, as if he were guarding something far more important than a hallway. His dark eyes flicked between the man and the door, reading both with equal seriousness. There was a faint scar along his ear that caught the light when he tilted his head, a reminder of days neither of them spoke about. He did not whine. He did not shift. He waited. The man lifted his hand. His knuckles hovered inches from the door. He imagined what he might say. 1,000 versions of the truth crowded his thoughts, each one heavier than the last. He could tell her about the hospital room, the machines that breathed for him when he could not. He could tell her about the promise he never meant to break, the birthday card he had found folded and forgotten. He could tell her that the silence she felt was not abandonment, but shame. But he did not knock. From inside the room came the low murmur of a video playing, then the soft rustle of movement. He recognized the sound of her turning over in bed, the way she sighed before settling again. She was close, so close that it hurt. He lowered his hand. This ritual repeated itself night after night. Stand. Listen. Leave. It had become a kind of penance, one he accepted willingly. In his mind, being hated was something he could endure. Being forgiven for a truth that would scar her, that was something he was not sure she deserved to carry. Earlier that evening, the girl had passed him in the living room without a word. She had changed clothes quickly, hoodie replaced with an oversized sweater, her hair still damp from a rushed shower. For a brief moment, she had looked younger, vulnerable in a way that caught him off guard. He had opened his mouth to speak, but the words had failed him, tangled in fear. She had walked past, eyes fixed on the floor. Now, alone in the hallway, he replayed that moment over and over, wondering how many chances he had already lost. Rex shifted suddenly. The dog rose to his feet and stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of the door. He sat again, closer this time, his body angled protectively, as if shielding whatever lay beyond the wood. His ears pricked, and he let out a low, almost inaudible sound. Not a growl, not a whine, but something in between. It stopped the man cold. He had seen that behavior before. It had happened years ago, in a place where the air was thick with smoke and fear. Rex had done the same thing then, positioning himself without command, alerting to something unseen, something about to break. The memory surged forward, uninvited, sharp and disorienting. The man's breath caught. This was the rehook moment, though he didn't know it as such. The instant when the present brushed too close to the past. He felt a chill run through him, the sense that something was watching, waiting. Not danger. Something quieter, something heavier. He knelt slowly, ignoring the pain, bringing himself level with the dog. His hand trembled as it rested against Rex's broad chest, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath thick fur. "What is it?" he whispered, though he knew the dog could not answer. Rex turned his head slightly, eyes still fixed on the door, as if the answer lay on the other side. The man closed his eyes. In that moment, a thought crossed his mind, unwelcome and frightening in its clarity. Maybe this silence was not protecting her at all. Maybe it was only protecting him. He had built his life around the idea that love meant carrying the weight alone, that if he absorbed enough pain, no one else would have to feel it. It was a lesson learned early, reinforced over years of discipline and loss. But standing there, with his hand on the dog and his daughter only feet away, he wondered if that belief had become a lie he hid behind. Still, he did not knock. The next day, he drove her to school in silence. The morning light cut sharply through the windshield, casting long shadows across the dashboard. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, arms crossed, eyes fixed straight ahead. Rex lay in the back, head resting between his paws, watching them both through half-lidded eyes. As they stopped at a red light, she finally spoke. "You don't have to wait up," she said quietly. "I'll walk home." He nodded. Okay. The word tasted bitter, but he let it stand. When she got out of the car, she hesitated, hand on the door. For a split second, it seemed like she might turn back, might say something more. Instead, she closed the door gently and walked away, shoulders tense, head down. He watched her until she disappeared into the crowd. That evening, the house felt heavier than ever. He sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had set, the dog lying at his feet. His eyes drifted to the hallway, to the closed door he would face again soon. He knew the truth would come out eventually. Secrets always did. But when it did, he wanted her to be stronger than she was now. Older, ready. Or perhaps that was just another excuse. He stood, leaning on the cane, and walked down the hallway once more. The ritual resumed. Stand. Listen. Leave. This time, however, he lingered longer than usual. From inside the room, he heard her whisper something, his name barely audible. His heart lurched. He took a step forward, then stopped himself, fear rising like a wall. Rex sat beside him again, calm and steady, a silent witness to his struggle. "I'm sorry," the man murmured, not sure whether he was speaking to the dog, to his daughter, or to God. He turned away, because sometimes love is not loud. Sometimes it does not knock. Sometimes it stands in the dark and chooses silence, believing, perhaps wrongly, that it is the lesser cruelty. And he believed, with every fractured piece of his heart, that being misunderstood was a price worth paying if it meant she could sleep without carrying the weight of his past. If this chapter reminds you that God often works through patience, restraint, and quiet sacrifice, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on the notification bell and walk with us as we honor the miracles born from love that asks for nothing in return. The mistake did not come with sirens or gunfire. It came quietly, like most things that break a family. It happened on a night much like this one, months earlier, when the house had still been pretending to be whole. Rain pressed against the windows in thin, relentless lines, and the sound of it had crept into the man's chest, steady and insistent, until his breathing no longer matched his thoughts. He had been sitting at the kitchen table then, the same place he sat now, staring at nothing, his hands flat against the wood as if grounding himself. Rex lay nearby, younger then, stronger, his head lifted at the first change in the man's posture. The girl had come down the stairs holding her phone, barefoot, her hair loose around her shoulders. She had been talking about school, about something small and unimportant. But the words had blurred together, swallowed by a sudden noise outside. A car backfired down the street. The man's body reacted before his mind did. He was on his feet in an instant, chairs scraping loudly across the floor. His heart slammed hard enough to make his vision narrow. His hand shot out, fingers curling as if reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. His voice rose sharp and commanding, a tone she had never heard from him before. "Get down." The girl froze. Her eyes widened, confusion flickering into fear. She dropped to the floor instinctively, hands over her head, breath hitching as tears spilled without warning. Rex barked once, alarmed, moving toward her before stopping short, unsure where to go. It lasted only seconds. The man realized where he was, what he had done. The kitchen, the rain, his daughter on the floor, shaking. "Hey," he said, his voice breaking as quickly as it had hardened. He knelt, pain forgotten, reaching for her. I'm sorry. It's okay." But something had already shattered. She pulled away from his touch, scrambling back until her shoulders hit the cabinets. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, as if he were dangerous. I was just talking, she whispered. I didn't mean, I know, he said desperately. I know. I heard. He stopped himself. Explanations came too easily. Forgiveness did not. That night, she locked her bedroom door for the first time. From that moment on, the man carried the memory like a weight chained to his chest. He replayed it endlessly, each detail sharper than the last. The way his voice had sounded, the way she had flinched, the way Rex had looked between them, confused and helpless. He never raised his voice again, not once, even when the silence grew heavy, even when the distance widened, even when it hurt. He believed he had earned that distance. Now, months later, the house still bore the invisible scar of that night. He felt it every time she stiffened when he moved too suddenly. Every time she watched his hands, cautious, as if waiting for them to become something else. He had learned to move slowly, deliberately, to announce himself softly when he entered a room. Guilt had become his routine. That afternoon, while he sorted through old papers at the kitchen table, the girl passed through on her way out. She paused, hesitating, then spoke without turning around. I'll be late. He nodded. Okay. The word was safe, neutral. He built his life out of words like that now. Rex followed her to the door, tail low, then returned to sit beside the man. The dog's muzzle had grown grayer since that night, his movements a fraction slower, but his presence remained steady. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, rested on the man's face longer than usual. You remember? The man murmured, not sure why he said it aloud. Rex blinked and then stood and moved closer, pressing his weight gently against the man's leg. It was a familiar gesture, one meant to ground, to anchor. The man closed his eyes, resting his hand on the dog's broad head, fingers tracing the thick fur. He had never forgiven himself for that night, and he did not intend to. In his mind, punishment was necessary. Distance was deserved. If being present caused fear, then absence, emotional, measured absence, was the safer choice. He told himself this every day. The rehook came unexpectedly. Late that evening, as the man sat alone in the living room, Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears pricking sharply. He stood, walked to the hallway, and stopped, staring toward the girl's room. His body tensed, not in alarm, but in focus. Then he looked back at the man and let out a single, soft whine. The man felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He stood and followed the dog, heart pounding, stopping short of the doorway. Inside, the girl sat on her bed, phone in her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She hadn't heard them. She hadn't noticed. Rex stepped forward, just inside the doorway, and sat. He did not move closer. He did not retreat. He simply stayed, his presence calm and steady, a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. The man watched from the hallway, unseen, something inside him shifting painfully. For the first time, he wondered if his silence was no longer protecting her, but protecting his own shame. The thought terrified him. He turned away before she could look up. Later, alone in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and bowed his head, hands clasped tightly together. He was not a man who prayed easily. Words failed him more often than not. But tonight, the weight was too heavy to carry alone. I didn't mean to scare her, he whispered into the dark. I never wanted to be that man. Tears burned behind his eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. He let them fall anyway. If there's a way to fix this, he continued, voice rough. Show me. He did not expect an answer. He had long stopped believing in easy redemption. But somewhere down the hall, Rex shifted in his sleep, letting out a low, contented sigh, as if reminding him that staying, despite mistakes, was still a choice, and perhaps the hardest one. The next morning, the girl left early, slipping out without a word. The man watched from the window, guilt settling back into its familiar place. He did not follow. He did not call. He accepted the distance as penance. Because heroes, he believed, were not the ones who never failed. They were the ones who lived the rest of their lives trying to make one mistake right. If this chapter reminds you that even the strongest hearts can stumble, and that God's grace meets us in our deepest regret, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on the notification bell and walk with us as we honor faith, forgiveness, and the quiet miracles that follow repentance. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, small and sharp, like pieces of glass catching the light when she wasn't looking for them. It started in the hallway closet. The girl had been searching for a charger, kneeling on the floor with her hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, frustration tightening her jaw. The house was quiet again, too quiet, and she told herself she liked it that way. Silence meant control. Silence meant nothing unexpected could happen. As she shifted a box aside, something slid out and landed near her knee with a soft, papery sound. A folded envelope? She picked it up without thinking. The paper was worn thin at the creases, the edges softened by time. Her name was written across the front in her father's handwriting, careful, deliberate, as if each letter had been weighed before being placed. She recognized it instantly. That made her stomach twist. Inside was a card she had made years ago, bright with uneven hearts and crooked lettering. "Happy birthday, Daddy. I waited for you. Love, Lily." Her breath caught. She remembered that night clearly now. The cake growing stale on the counter, the candles melting into waxy pools as the hours passed. She remembered telling herself he'd forgotten, that he'd chosen something else over her. The memory had hardened into a certainty she carried everywhere. Her hands trembled as she folded the card back and placed it carefully on top of the box. Something wasn't right. He would never have kept this if he hadn't cared. He would never have hidden it if it hadn't hurt. Behind her, Rex appeared in the doorway. The German shepherd moved more slowly these days, his steps measured, his joints stiff with age, but his presence filled the space immediately. He watched her with steady eyes, head tilted slightly, as if he sensed the shift inside her. His coat was thick and dark, graying along the muzzle, and when he stepped closer, his nails clicked softly against the floor. "It's nothing," she said aloud. The words meant for herself as much as for him. Rex sat. She sighed and stood, card still clutched in her hand. As she turned, she noticed the bottom of the closet box had split open. Inside were papers, medical forms, discharge summaries, dates circled in red, hospital names, machines she didn't recognize, a timeline that overlapped with the night he hadn't come home. Shock washed through her, cold and numbing. She carried the papers to her room and spread them across the bed, heart pounding. She wasn't supposed to be looking at this. She knew that. But once the first piece had fallen into place, the rest demanded to be seen. He hadn't been gone because he didn't want to be there. He hadn't been gone at all. The front door opened softly. She froze, papers half hidden beneath her blanket. Rex rose instantly, turning toward the sound, tail lifting just slightly. Her father's footsteps were careful, as always, his cane tapping lightly as he crossed the living room. She listened to the familiar rhythm, suddenly hearing it differently. Not as an inconvenience, but as evidence. She waited until he passed her door, then stepped out into the hallway. Dad. The word felt strange on her tongue, heavier than it used to be. He stopped, turning slowly. Up close, she noticed things she had ignored for years. The deep lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders sat unevenly, the faint tremor in his hand when he rested it against the wall. He looked tired, not just physically, worn in a way that reached deeper. "What is it?" he asked gently. She swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" His brow furrowed. "Tell you what?" She held up the card, the papers. The truth, unfolded and impossible to deny. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just stared at the objects in her hands, something like grief flickering across his expression. Rex stepped forward, positioning himself between them again, not as a barrier this time, but as a presence. Solid, grounding. "I didn't want you to worry," he said finally, his voice low. She laughed, sharp and breathless. "So you let me think you didn't care." The words hit harder than she intended. He flinched, visibly, as if struck. "I thought it was easier," he said quietly. "I thought hating me would hurt less than knowing the truth." Tears blurred her vision. "You don't get to decide that for me." Silence fell between them, thick and charged. This was the rehook moment, the pivot she would remember later as the instant everything changed. Rex suddenly turned his head toward the open window. His ears pricked sharply, his body tensing. A distant siren wailed somewhere far off, its sound stretching thin through the evening air. The dog let out a low, uneasy sound, then looked back at her father. He said a name under his breath. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be heard. But she heard it. "Mark." Her chest tightened. "Who's that?" He closed his eyes. Rex whined softly, pressing his head against the man's leg as if urging him forward. "He was supposed to come home," her father said, voice rough. "Not me." The room seemed to tilt. He told her then, not everything, not details she didn't need, but enough. About a choice made in seconds. About staying behind so others could leave. About waking up in a hospital bed while families were notified. About carrying a name that never stopped echoing. She sank onto the edge of the couch, the weight of it crushing her. The pieces aligned with painful clarity. The nightmares, the silence, the fear she'd seen flicker in his eyes when sounds were too loud. The night he'd shouted, the shame he carried like armor. "You didn't abandon us," she whispered. He shook his head. "I thought I had." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, the man she'd been embarrassed of dissolved, replaced by someone achingly human, someone who had survived when others hadn't, and paid for it every day since. "I'm sorry," she said, the words breaking free at last. "I was so angry. I didn't understand." He moved toward her, hesitating, then stopping himself. "You don't know me." She stood and closed the distance herself, resting her forehead against his chest. He stiffened, and slowly, carefully, wrapped his arms around her, as if afraid she might vanish. Rex sat beside them, tail thumping once, softly. The truth had found its way back. Not as an accusation, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. And as she held her father, she realized the man she had been ashamed of had carried someone else's death so she could grow up with one. If this chapter reminds you that God reveals truth not to wound us, but to heal us, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on the notification bell and join us as we honor faith, sacrifice, and the miracles that return love to where it belongs. Morning arrived quietly, without ceremony. The light filtered through the trees lining the street, pale and steady, as if the world itself had decided to slow down. The man stood at the front door longer than usual, his hand resting on the knob, his jacket already on. He no longer felt the urgency to rush. Some things, he had learned, could not be forced. They had to be walked toward. Behind him, the girl tied her shoes, her movements unhurried. She wore her hoodie, but the sleeves were pushed back this time, her hands visible, open. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, catching the light as she stood. She did not look at him yet, but she didn't turn away either. Rex waited between them, tail relaxed, posture easy in a way it hadn't been for years. The German shepherd was aging, his muzzle grayer, his steps slower, but his presence remained solid, grounding. His ears flicked at distant sounds, but there was no tension in his body now. Whatever vigilance he had carried for so long seemed, for the moment, unnecessary. "Ready?" the man asked. She nodded. Yeah. They stepped outside together. The sidewalk stretched ahead, familiar and unremarkable. Houses stood quietly on either side, lawns trimmed, curtains drawn. Life continued, unaware of the small shift taking place within these three figures. At first, they walked as they always had. The girl a few steps ahead, the man trailing slightly behind, cane tapping softly against the concrete. Rex walked in the middle. After a few minutes, the girl slowed. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't stop or turn around. She simply shortened her stride, her pace adjusting almost unconsciously. The man noticed immediately. He always did. He took one step faster, then another, until the distance between them closed without either of them acknowledging it. They walked like that for a while, 3 footsteps falling into an imperfect rhythm, but together. There were no apologies spoken, no explanations offered. The truth had already done its work. What remained did not need words. As they passed the small park at the end of the street, the girl glanced sideways at her father. In the daylight, she saw him differently now. The slight stiffness in his movements no longer irritated her. The lines on his face no longer embarrassed her. They told a story she was only beginning to understand. He felt her gaze and looked back, surprised. Their eyes met, just for a second. He didn't look away. Halfway down the path, Rex stopped. The dog's behavior drew them both up short. He stood still, head lifted, eyes fixed on a patch of sunlight filtering through the trees. His tail was neither high nor low, his posture alert but calm. He sniffed the air, then sat slowly, deliberately, as if marking the moment. The man's heart tightened. For a brief instant, he felt that familiar sensation, the sense that something unseen was close. Not danger, not memory, something else. He could not name it, but it filled his chest with a strange warmth. The girl followed Rex's gaze. "What is it?" she asked softly. Rex didn't move. This was the rehook moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, but it stayed with them. The dog's stillness felt intentional, as though he were acknowledging something only he could perceive. A pause in the world. A breath. The man closed his eyes for a second. He thought of names he no longer said aloud. He thought of choices made under pressure, of lives diverted onto different paths. He thought of grace, not as forgiveness earned, but as something given without explanation. When he opened his eyes, Rex rose and continued forward. The moment passed. They resumed walking. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, then hesitated. Slowly, She slipped it back in without turning it on. The man noticed and said nothing. As they approached the diner at the corner, the same one where everything had changed weeks earlier, the girl tensed briefly, then relaxed. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She walked beside him, matching his pace. "Do you want coffee?" she asked. He blinked, caught off guard. "Sure." Inside, Sarah stood behind the counter, her blonde hair pulled back as always, her tall, slender frame moving with practiced ease. When she saw them enter together, she paused, her expression softening. She noticed the small things, the way the girl stayed close, the way the dog settled easily at their feet. "Morning," she said warmly. "The usual?" The man nodded. "Please." As they sat, the girl watched him stir his coffee with steady hands. She noticed the old watch on his wrist, the scuffs on his boots, the quiet way he occupied space. None of it felt embarrassing anymore. It felt earned. Rex lay between their chairs, eyes half closed, content. When they left the diner, the world seemed no different than it had before. Cars passed, people hurried by, but something essential had shifted. On the walk home, the man found himself no longer counting steps. His breathing matched the pace of the moment. He wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. At the front of the house, the girl stopped. She turned to him fully this time, meeting his eyes. "I'm glad you came back," she said simply. He swallowed. "So am I." They stood there for a moment longer than necessary, neither of them rushing to end it. Rex leaned against the man's leg, then pressed gently into the girl's knee, tail wagging once. 3 figures. 1 path. The man did not return home to be called a hero. He did not return for recognition or redemption. He returned so his daughter would not have to grow up learning how to live without a father. And that, he knew now, was enough. If this story reminds you that God's miracles are often quiet, found in patience, reconciliation, and love that walks beside us, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Turn on the notification bell and continue honoring the angels who serve, sacrifice, and return home guided by grace. Sometimes, the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They arrive in silence, in patience that lasts longer than pain, in love that stays even after mistakes. God does not always change our past, but He walks with us as we learn how to carry it. He places people in our lives not to be perfect, but to be present. And sometimes, the miracle is not being rescued from hardship, but being given the strength to keep walking together through it. If this story reminded you that faith still lives in ordinary moments, in family, forgiveness, and quiet courage, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Please like this video, share it with someone who may need hope today, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue honoring stories of sacrifice, grace, and unseen strength. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He grant you peace in difficult seasons, clarity when answers feel distant, and the comfort of knowing you are never walking alone. Thank you for being here.